Now, what we are talking about are delays in the procurement process in the Indian Air Force. That's what this man, the Air Chief Marshal, referred to today. In fact, going to the extent of saying that virtually every acquisition has been delayed. So let's go through a couple of the key points of the Indian Air Force's procurements and what he actually means over there. This is the Tejas fighter, the Tejas Mark 1A fighter. It's a stepping stone to a much more substantive fighter. That's called the Tejas Mark 2. The date of the first flight of the Tejas Mark 1A, not the Tejas, the Mark 1A, February 2nd, 2020. On February 2021, there was a contract for 83 aircraft which was signed. At the moment, you've got just one aircraft which is in service. That's unacceptable, and this is just a stepping stone for something much larger. That's not even come as yet, the Tejas Mark 2. The next aircraft we can talk about is this. Now, if you think this is a rail aircraft, it's not, it's a model. It's the AMCA, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. The date of the first flight projected for late 2028. The date of the order, still no firm order. The number in service, obviously 0. But then why are we talking about a plane which has not even made its first flight? Because the real worry is on Pakistan acquiring a Chinese stealth platform called the JF-35, which is likely to be inducted into the Pakistan Air Force in small numbers starting this year. If that is to happen, and India has not even prototyped this jet, the AMCA, then the Indian Air Force is perhaps in great trouble. Let's move to another one, and we can go on and on with this. This is the IJT, the Intermediate Jet Trainer. It was offered as an indigenous solution to a very important requirement. Remember, fighting wars comes if you have efficiently trained pilots. And India, if we are building fighter jets, then surely we could have an intermediate jet trainer already and done. Well, the first flight was in March 12, 2003. At the moment, no order has been placed. The number of aircraft in service is 0. Let's move to another particular category. This is a horrible story because this is something the Indian Air Force needs. It needs mid-air refueling tankers. You've got 6 in service. They're off the old Russian IL-78 variant. The Air Force felt that they need to extend the ability to deploy far away. They need to extend the ability of their fighters to remain in air, so they needed to refuel. So in 2006, they put up a demand for 6 more tankers, a request for proposal. It's now 2025. The numbers inducted 0. The numbers are absolutely 0 at this stage. So this being the case, there are a lot of queries and concerns about the pace of induction. Here's what the Air Chief said today.
Timelines is a big issue. That is where that Vachan part comes in. So once a timeline is given, not a single project that I can think of has been completed on time. So this is something where we have to look at. Why should we promise something which cannot be achieved? While signing the contract itself, some of the times we are sure that it is not going to come up. But we just sign the contract. Uske baad dekhenge kya karna. Obviously, then the process gets vitiated.
Well, joining us now, a very special guest. We're joined by Air Marshal SP Dharkar, who recently retired as the Vice Chief of the Indian Air Force. He's been a MiG-27 pilot, an exceptional fighter pilot. Besides being the former Vice Chief, he's also commanded the Eastern Air Command. Thanks, sir, very much for being with us. I think some of the points made by the Air Force Chief is actually stating it quite directly, but perhaps that's the need of the hour. What he said in terms of timelines, and I quote, "This is crucial. Every project I can think of has been delayed. Why can't we meet promised timelines?" How badly is this impacting the operational capability of the Indian Air Force?
Good evening, Vishnu. Well, you covered a large number of projects over there in the beginning. And while you covered the big ticket ones, what the chief is pointing out today in his usual candid and very straightforward manner when we were speaking at the CII seminar, he was mentioning about various contracts, and he actually was not necessarily referring only to the major ones like the ones you cover. Yeah. Because in some of those, what he was pointing out also was in terms of the production delays that we observed and the antecedent issues that then come up both in terms of capability development and capacity building. In both manners, whether it is in the big ticket contracts or even if it is about weapons and weaponry, spares and the like, what he was probably referring to was how meeting timelines is essential in order to stay ahead of the game. Everything that gets delayed actually then results in, has a number of secondary and tertiary effects in the background, whether it is related to training like you covered, whether it is related in terms of how associated issues get both done or delayed as a result, and so how overall capability then takes a beating.
Air Marshal, it's not just about the actual manufacture of aircraft, it's also the entire process of the government placing orders. What I haven't spoken about over here, for example, is that 114 aircraft deal. That's nowhere in sight. I mean, we've been talking chief after chief after chief. Yes, we'll get it done. Yes, we'll get it done. It's still not been done. And, we face a twin threat of Pakistan and China. How crucial is it to get, for example, that 114 aircraft deal done really fast?
Oh, without a doubt, and I'm certain everybody sees it in quite the same light, that it is a critical requirement, and I'm certain there are people working in the background to make it happen. The problem is actually twofold. One, of course, that it comes at significant cost, and so one has to manage it within available budgets and the like. The second is in terms of how this would marry up with what is our own intent of going Atmanirbhar, which today's world is an essential. Because you really cannot rely on an external agency to be providing you the equipment you require to ensure your security. That Atmanirbharta, and this government has been really pushing that particular agenda from the very beginning. And actually, we should have been doing it even further backwards in history. But when you merge that with a concurrent requirement, a requirement at least till the time we build those capabilities in-house and field them in relevant numbers and in adequate capacity, what we would require is what you just pointed out, and I'm certain everybody is seized of that. While that be true, global trends, geopolitics, the relevance of what technology is made available, whether it now involves an entirely new line, what would be the challenges in maintaining those and in keeping them operational in terms of both the acquisition and subsequent operational utilization, they all marry up into one major challenge. Of course, at the bottom of everything is budget.
That's always the problem. Isn't it, Air Marshal? If we had infinite budgets, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
That, of course, is true, and everything is resource crunched. And especially when one is looking forward to, having development and infrastructure development and then uplifting of the masses. When you do all that, there would be a limitation, necessarily. At the same time, I'm certain, especially with recent trends and with whatever is happening all across the globe, I'm certain people in the background are working really hard in order to push that 114 that you spoke about.
There's another point I picked up on what the Air Chief said. He said that once the AMCA, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, which is a stealth platform, does come out, it has to be of the current generation, right? He didn't refer to it as fifth generation. Now that's important because we are already seeing the Chinese move beyond the fifth generation. And considering the fact, with two prototypes in the air, considering the fact that this is going to be flying perhaps in a prototype form only by 2028, 2030, perhaps even after that, and it may not get inducted in any numbers before 2035. If it's not current, it's fairly pointless. So therefore, what the chief is saying is that there has to be a jump in the technology. Obviously, that means more R&D, because the Air Force cannot be affording to buy planes which are not contemporary, right?
Quite right. One thing about timelines is also the fact that technology continues to develop. And technology in the aerospace domain develops just as fast, both in terms of the aircraft and their capabilities themselves, sensors, sensor fusion, and the like. Weapons also have to match up, because should you have a platform wherein weapon integration takes some amount of time thereafter, then everything results in delayed acquisition of a given capability. And when you have adversaries who are both building those technologies and fielding them in much faster pace, then it becomes even more critical. Also, then invariably what happens is delayed timelines result in some kind of qualitative requirement creep, because one recognizes that there are newer capabilities out there are newer technologies out there that need to be now integrated and integrated fast, so that you retain that, or at least don't lose out on an edge that an adversary is gaining. In which case, then that timeline issue and that ability to ensure that your technology that has been incorporated into whatever you're making is current is a criticality. Absolutely.
What the chief also said is we need both capability and capacity. Now, for so long, we didn't have that capacity in industry in India. I'm talking about private sector industry. We now have that. And I think it's important to also focus on some areas of excellence. For example, Dynamatics is one company which comes to mind, which builds the fuselage structures of the Tejas, the mastered carbon composite airframes that has many spin-off uses. There are other companies which are really picking up, certainly in the drone space, but we'll talk about that perhaps later on. Do you believe that our industrial base is now maturing to a point where they can at least build advanced aerostructures and therefore take that pressure off Hindustan Aeronautics?
Definitely. And in terms of both taking off some pressure, as well as now putting in more effort, whether it is in terms of research and development or in just the manufacturing, I think we have much more capability today in-house in India. What remains to be seen is to be able to harness it, because no matter what, it is a numbers game. There is economy of scale, and in the aerospace domain, there is not enough scale. So then one has to accept that there would be a little amount of sunk cost, and that it would be a relatively more expensive, at least at the initial outset, a relatively expensive use of technology in order to move forward. But I think it exists today. We have enough both big players as well as a number of relatively smaller players who are willing to jump into it with new technology, harnessing manufacturing abilities that they are picking up from across the globe. What remains now is for us to be able to put this together as one composite whole and be able to utilize individual abilities in various different segments in order to actually put it together. I think it is possible. All it requires is a little bit of let's say, legislative push, and at the same time, a little bit of opportunity, as well as a little bit of less risk-averse behavior from industry.
But Air Marshal, I think, again, going back to the point on budgets, our defense budget as a percentage of our GDP is very low. I mean, it's similar to what it was in 1962 or so. Now, that may not be an entirely good way of measuring it, because our overall economy was also quite small in 1962. But be that as it may, we need an enhanced defense GDP, not just for weapon systems acquisition, but also for research and development. We can't keep talking about Make in India and Atmanirbharta unless we have the technology. There's stuff that no one is going to sell you. So when the DRDO chief, another exceptional man, says that, look, if you want Made in India and Atmanirbharta, you need R&D. So how important is it for us to step up our defense budget just to fuel R&D, the next generation of engineers, the next generation of scientists, people who have nothing to do with flying the planes, but people who are the minds behind designing it, understanding the future of AI, machine learning, weapon systems development, what have you. Isn't that what this should really be about?
You know, about 2 decades ago, we started with exploiting our soft skills. And thereafter, we've gone on exploiting our ability in software. And I guess there is enough opportunity today now to harness that kind of talent. While, global trends are actually helping us do that, because if you look at how Europe and the Western world is starting to rely more and more of homegrown employment, there may be just that much opportunity for us to harness Indian brain and prevent that brain drain. Given that opportunity now, as a result of global trends, it may be then possible to actually utilize this into better R&D. It requires a little more of, infusion of basically money, both in the public sector as well as in the private sector. And I think the time is ripe to make that happen. When you look at some of these technologies,
Go ahead, sir.
AI, quantum, fact remains that much of what you find in terms of the research background, the academics who do it outside in foreign countries, many of them are of Indian origin, which means then actually that if we could harness that talent at home we would be so much better off. I think that there is opportunity now, and I think this is recognized both at the government level as well as private level. Because, and here somehow, while many refer to startups to provide that opportunity for you, I don't really think startup have that kind of adequate background capacity in order to work it forward. I think
What
it is
about
the
drones, though?
medium and
Drone
large
startups have done well.
segments.
Drone startups have done well, Air Marshal.
Yeah, yes. But then you would also recognize that those startups look at very niche abilities in very small segments. And to build that to some reasonable capacity or some reasonable capability and then work it to improving overall, let's talk about aerospace at this time, may require a number of iterations. And in that manner, I would believe that some of the medium and the bigger companies would do probably better in that regard. Whether I really don't want to take names here, but there's enough opportunity in homegrown IT talent to make it happen.
Air Marshal, I won't let you go, obviously, before we speak about Operation Sindoor. Now, you retired on the 30th of April. You missed all the action. Your friends say that it was a conspiracy of some sort, but we'll keep that out for the moment.
Well, it just happened by time. I happened to be born on the 29th April, so on the 30th of April, it was time for me to hang my uniform.
Air Marshal, the point is that you would have been right at the helm of affairs as Vice Chief, or along with the Air Chief, obviously, to hone tactics, to work with the technology available, not just with fighter pilots, but also surface-to-air missiles. The imagery we have on our screen now, these videos released by the government, showcase precision hits. Decades of training resulted in these incredible strikes going in, which we've independently corroborated with satellite imagery. Could you tell us what it feels like today, sir, for you to see pictures like that, where we've taken out hangars, taken out parts of air bases, runways, underground facilities potentially? What is it a culmination of?
It is an immensely proud feeling. There is tremendous regret that I wasn't around to be part of the game. Notwithstanding that part, I think our people did extremely well. And when I talk about people, I'm talking about people across the entire domain. This actually was done at every level. It was a national effort. And not just the services. I'm certain the services had enough political backing. I'm certain the services had enough cross-domain political and otherwise backing. And that is how this happened. The images speak for themselves. And I'm certain everything that we heard as to how we had an adversary who quickly wanted us to cease taking on such further act was telling by itself. Of course, it was immensely a proud feeling, as any Indian would have felt too.
A final question to you. Now, I know that you know too much to tell me which weapon was used on which target. So I won't ask you that question. But if you offer to volunteer that information, I'd certainly welcome it. But be that as it may, my question more seriously is this. We've got, I would say, some of the most world-class air-to-ground missiles now, whether it's the BrahMos, the Rampage, the Scalp, the Crystal Maze, the Hammer. In the ranges that they operate, the technology they infuse, would you agree with me when I say that this is absolutely world-class for our requirements?
Without a doubt. And you saw the effects of how the utilization of all those weapons actually was. And if I were to draw a parallel, if you recollect Balakot, and that question about as to whether those two small holes on one particular building were good enough to say that they were targeted well, we had a similar hole this time, and we also saw what the images of the inside of that particular building were. I think that case also was kind of substantiated by what Sindoor, Operation Sindoor did. And I think it has actually vindicated our stand of several years that we managed to do it pretty well even then.
Air Marshal, always wonderful speaking to you. And, this really goes to show the prowess of the Indian Air Force against a formidable rival. Let's face it, the Pakistan Air Force is a near peer, but by the end of the day, it was the Pakistan government which came onto the ceasefire table as a result of the weight of these Indian Air Force assaults. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us.